You know what? It's important to let the guys talk for once because they never get a chance to speak. Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife, and today I am bringing you yet another Books and Brews. And this one is 3 books that I've recently read, all with a male-led narrative. So they're not all written by men, but the thing that they have in common is that they all feature a male as the main character. They're all 3 different romances, they're set in 3 different places. Let's take a look at them. So the first one that I read was The Flip Side by James Bailey. I read this one back in September of 2020, and I absolutely fell in love with the idea of it. So in this book, you're following Josh, who on New Year's Eve proposes to his girlfriend at the top of the London Eye, and she says no. He decides then to take his life into the hands of fate and is not going to make any decisions for himself for the next year. He's going to leave every decision that he makes down to the flip of a coin. He takes a 50p piece with him everywhere that he goes and leaves every single decision down to the flip of this coin. And I mean every single decision. Whether or not he should get up now or give himself 10 minutes extra in bed, whether he should apply for this job or apply for this job, whether he should have this for dinner or have this for dinner. I really loved that idea because I have the decision-making skills of a 5-month-old. So I needed that kind of a book to say, this is what happens when you leave decisions up to fate and chance. It gave me the kind of kick that I needed to make my own decisions, even if they're not very simple to make. I did, however, think that using it for every single decision might have been a little bit too far. Okay, there are days where I do leave making dinner up to, okay, am I going to have this or am I going to have this? Because I like both of them really equally. I just can't decide between the two of them. I'm going to put it into a Google pick a number, or I'm going to text a friend and ask what they would make. There are times where I don't make my own decisions, but it's not for something that's completely life-changing. I did love the idea of the flipping coins. I just think maybe it was a little bit too overused. Something that I also really loved about this book is the dynamics within the friendship group here. There's 4 of them that come together quite a lot in this friendship group, and something that I really loved is the dynamic that you have between the 4 of them. You can tell that they absolutely love each other. You can tell that they would completely lay their lives down for each other, but you also can tell that if the situation called for it, they would murder everybody else. That's the kind of friendship that I think is the best one when it's portrayed like that. In a friendship that they're very close, they really care for each other, but they do annoy each other with your little quirks and little things that make you you. I don't think there's one friend that anybody here can mention and say, I love them, but. Something else that I really loved about this book is that it kind of gave me an opportunity to travel around Europe while I was stuck on my chair for the entire situation reading it. This book follows kind of a situation where Josh meets a girl while he's doing a mini marathon around London, and he's going to the bathroom in one of the museums in London and meets a girl called Ava. He doesn't know a whole lot about Ava. He just knows that they have stood together and looked at a picture of sunflowers by Vincent van Gogh. And very soon she is going to start a new job in a bookshop somewhere across Europe, and he has no idea where. So he goes on this kind of search right across the continent, bringing him to Munich, bringing him to Budapest, bringing him to Amsterdam, trying to place this girl that he has instantly fallen in love with. I don't really like insta-love. Insta-love is not a favourite thing of mine, but I thought that it was done really well here in that it didn't feel very insta-lovey. It just felt like we're getting to know each other, and I'm going to try and see if we can bring something into this. I'll be honest, I had pictured a different romance at the end of this book, and I'm really, really glad that my prediction was wrong, because I think friendship groups need to be portrayed still as friendship groups, and not every girl and guy friend need to end up together by the end of the book. And I actually really liked where that situation had ended up going, and it completely took me by surprise by the end of this book. I really, really loved this book. I would absolutely recommend it, and I gave it 4 stars. The next book that I read on this list, I read around Christmas time. I think I actually started it on Christmas Eve, and it was All About Us by Tom Ellen. So this book, we're following Ben, who is kind of going through a rough patch in his marriage with Daphne, his wife. And they're having a bit of an argument on Christmas Eve when they're putting up the decorations, which feels like a really late time of year to be putting up your decorations, but I won't question it. I do put mine up last week of November, so who am I to judge? Ben decides to leave the apartment for a little bit and just kind of clear his head and come back when his head is a little bit easier and they can discuss it as rational adults. While he's out, he goes for a drink with a friend of his and they meet a watch seller who gives him a new watch that he can use with the hand set at, I think, 2 minutes to midnight. Ben goes back home, gets into bed, and wakes up the next morning at the day where he and Daphne first met. But the thing about the day that he and Daphne first met is that he also met a woman called Alice, who was a really good friend of his, and he felt like something was going to happen with himself and Alice, but it never got to it. He and Daphne met that night during a game of sardines, and it all escalated from there. They're now married and planning a future together. The watch takes him from different stages of his life to days that he and Daphne are getting on well together, to their wedding day, to a day that they break up, and a day that he and Alice end up getting together, and a completely different life that he could have been living without the whole having met Alice thing, or having not met Daphne thing, or having this thing not happen. This was marketed as a kind of a Christmas Carol retelling, which is one of my favourite Christmas books, and I read it every single year in the lead up to Christmas. I think I actually finished A Christmas Carol maybe a day or two before I started this book. Maybe I misread the book, maybe I wasn't paying too much attention to it, but I didn't really get A Christmas Carol vibes until maybe 50 or 60% into the book. But I did really enjoy the journey of finding out what could happen in this situation. Is the grass greener when you're talking about this person? Living a whole life of, what if I had done this? What if I had met this person? What if I had married this person? What if I lived in this area? That's something that I love in books. I love seeing a kind of an alternate life and an alternate reality that you could live in if you had made a totally different choice. It's something that I often think about for my own life. What if I hadn't come here? What if I hadn't taken that course? What if I hadn't met that person? So something that I really enjoy in life being done so well in a book was something that I really loved reading. Something that I am going to say that I loved about this book, though, is the chapters where Ben gets more time with his mother. Before the beginning of this book, Ben's mother has passed away, and he's always regretted not having spent enough time with her, not having told her that he loved her, not having seen her more often. There are basically small regrets that we all have when a person that we love passes away. I absolutely loved the scene where Ben gets another Christmas with his mother. It absolutely drove me to floods of tears. It was really difficult to read on a Christmas that I wasn't spending it with my own family. It's something that is so emotional, and I think something that everybody who reads it can touch on in some way or another. Such a fantastic book, and I genuinely would recommend it to everybody. So we come to the third and final book on the list of books that have a male narrative, and that is The Single Dad's Handbook by Lynsey James. This is Lynsey's 7th book. It's her most recent, and it actually just came out. It came out in ebook on the 2nd of April, and if you're more of a paperback lover, then you'll also be okay, because this comes out in paperback on the 24th of June. It is completely emotional, and it's something that if you really loved P.S. I Love You by Cecilia Ahern, this book is for you. Here we're following Evan, whose wife Claire has passed away from breast cancer before the start of the book. And the prologue of the book is actually a letter from Claire in her final days telling him to be okay and kind of helping him to come to terms with her death. Evan is now left behind with their daughter Violet, who is 5 years old at the start of the book and starting school for the first time. And he's coming through that whole emotional turmoil of her first day at school while her mother is not there to bring her with him. When Evan is back at the house and going through everything, he finds a set of letters that Claire had left for him with instructions on how to live his life, basically. So she's left him a letter for Violet's first day at school, which is helpful for the start of the book. She's left him notes for first dates. She's left him how to cope when everything seems like it's going to shit, basically. I really loved that idea of the book. It felt like we were having Claire still as a main character, even though she wasn't physically there. And it also felt like we were helping to keep Claire's memory alive for her daughter That's something that I really loved. It felt like it was done really well, and it didn't feel like it was overdone at all. It felt like there were letters for appropriate times, that they would have been necessary, where maybe a mother's insight would have been more appropriate for Violet than a father's, or just help for Evan to try and rebuild his life. There's also a bullying storyline some way through this book, and I felt like that was dealt with really well. It's something that quite a lot of us will have gone through and quite a lot of us will associate with, but I felt like it was handled really well, especially when you're talking about somebody who is Violet's age and who is just coming to terms with starting school for the first time, making friends, probably meeting people her own age for the first time in her life. I felt like the way that the storyline was dealt with in the book was done spectacularly, and also the outcome of it was done really well. Violet herself is written fantastically. She's like your quintessential 5-year-old who just wants to stay at home and play games all day. Also, she has this kind of fixation with space, and that was done so well, because I don't think there's any of us out there who didn't have like a fixation when we were 5 or 7 or so that we carried on with for such a long time, and it was such a big part of our personality. If you're wondering, mine was the Titanic, and I'm still a Titanic girl. There is a romance in this book, and it's a friends to lovers romance that I didn't feel was done cliche at all. It felt very natural, it wasn't rushed. It gave the characters a lot of time to discover their new feelings about each other. There are a couple of other dates that Evan goes on before he ends up with this woman. They are hilarious. There are some really funny outcomes of these dates, and I think there's something that people will recognize in their dating life. Overall, this was a really fantastic read. And like I said, if you were a fan of P.S. I Love You by Cecilia Hearn, this is a book that you will absolutely adore. And there's also an entire back catalogue of Lynsey's work that you can get to know as well. There we are. 3 romance books that all have a male-led narrative in them. Have you read any romance books from a male perspective, and did you enjoy them? Don't forget to like and subscribe, because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.